On the right. Ian Trottier here for Discussion Truth. Some technical difficulties there. Going to jump right to it here for a special Sunday edition. Just finished with Dean Rauter, the hidden Nazi, America's untold story of America's deal with the devil. Just finished that at the what was that, the 3 o'clock hour, Standard Eastern Standard, and now bringing on a man that is actively suing. He's got 3 lawsuits going on. Folks, Lucas Wall lives in Washington, D.C., but has been stranded at his mother's house in the Villages in Florida since early June when Southwest Airlines and the Transportation Security Administration refused to let him fly out of Orlando without wearing a mask, which he medically is unable to do because of a long documented medical condition. Wall runs a travel blog called Lucas.travel. He's been to 134 nations on his quest to see all 195. He's also seen all 50 states, all 50 state capitol buildings, all 60 national parks, and all 5 U.S. territories. His absolute life and passion is, of course, you may have guessed, travel. But Lucas Wall began a crusade to challenge transportation mask mandates June 7th by filing a federal lawsuit against Joe Biden, the CDC, TSA, and 3 other federal agencies, and the transit and airport authorities in Orlando for illegally requiring face coverings. A week later, he filed the first class action lawsuit in the nation against 7 airlines for illegally denying mask exemptions to the disabled who can't safely obstruct their breathing. Last month, he joined 12 other disabled flyers around the United States to file 6 lawsuits against the Transportation Security Administration to strike down the federal transportation mask mandate. We also have, folks, Josh Yoder of U.S. Freedom Flyers standing by. So we may bring in Josh, but let's welcome Lucas Wall to program. Calling Lucas in right now. This is Ian Trottier for Discussions of Truth. And as always, I open up with Seek and Destroy by Metallica, Seek Out and Destroy Corruption. Lucas Wall, ladies and gentlemen. Lucas Wall.
This is Lucas.
Lucas Wall, welcome to Discussions of Truth. Thank you for standing by. This is Ian Trottier. How are you today, sir?
Doing fine. Thank you. Yourself?
Well, doing well. It seems that movements such as yours are landing on ears that are listening. Lucas, tell listeners a little bit more about yourself. I've just read the bio that you sent me, so they have a good idea who you are. I didn't realize you were so well traveled globally. You're used to traveling, but the recent mandates with the airlines have cramped that travel. Please make an introduction, Lucas. Who are you? What are you doing?
Yeah, I'm a longtime global nomad. I've been to 134 countries, and this will go down as the first calendar year since I was 11 years old that I have not left the United States. And that's due strictly because of all of the airline and federal transportation mask mandates. I have an anxiety disorder. I cannot cover my face. It provokes a panic attack and a feeling of claustrophobia, and makes me very upset and hyperventilating and so forth. And so I've devoted the last 6 months of my life to trying to destroy these mandates and have them struck down by the courts.
Lucas, you are one of those that you are an individual. You're an American that has been vaccinated. You've been written up a number of times by publications that I'm aware of, Business Insider. Um, you have been vaccinated, yet you're still being asked to wear a mask. How do you feel about that?
That's right. It's total insanity. I got vaccinated as soon as it became available to my age group in I think it was March, second dose in April, so fully vaccinated as of May 11th. And then I went to start traveling again June 2nd and was prohibited by the airlines and TSA because I medically can't wear a mask. And they have this outrageous exemption process that's totally illegal that I'm suing about. I respect everyone's personal choices. If you believe the vaccine is not for you, I don't believe it should be mandated. Likewise, if someone does not want to or cannot medically tolerate having their only sources of oxygen blocked, then they should not be required to do that. There's no evidence that masks have been effective. In fact, I have on my blog, lucas.travel, a page of 223 scientific studies, medical articles, and videos that I've collected during all my lawsuit research showing that scientists have known for decades masks are ineffective. They do not stop the spread of respiratory viruses. In some cases, people who wear masks long term are actually more likely to get sick than those who do not wear masks because of all the bacterial contamination that occurs from touching and removing and putting the mask back on and off and so forth. Um, so we have been fed a lie that masks are a magic solution to COVID 19. As we have seen, we're in what, month 20 now, and there are still lots of cases and lots of restrictions despite so many people wearing masks for a year and a half. If something that you're doing for a year and a half doesn't work, why do you keep doing the same thing over and over again?
Lucas, you for listeners to understand, you are suing the CDC and the Biden administration. You're also suing 7 commercial airlines, and you have via text that you've sent me a case against the TSA, which will be heard or going to the Supreme Court this week. In your opinion, Lucas, why is it that the Biden administration continues their admiration with this mask wearing? Why does this? Why do they want to continue this order on having people wear masks?
I think they just don't want to admit that they were wrong. This was a central campaign promise of Biden last year, even though he admitted on the campaign trail that trying to do a national mask mandate would likely be unconstitutional. He went ahead and did it anyway, just to placate all of the folks on his side who somehow have bought into this propaganda that masks are the solution for coronavirus. And now that they're so dug in and they've so bought into this, he just doesn't want to let it go because then that would be admitting that he was wrong. And he's very vulnerable politically right now. I am a political independent, so I sort of say this from my post in the middle of the spectrum. Uh, and he knows that two-thirds of Americans somehow still believe that masks are effective. So he feels he has public opinion on his side. And if he were to change course and eliminate the transportation mask mandate, that would be a admission that he was wrong on that issue. And nobody wants to admit they're wrong, especially not when you're the president of the United States. But scientifically, it makes no sense. We have hardly any states have mask mandates. Most states have abolished their mask mandates back in the spring, many, many months ago. And if you're here in Florida, where I've been stuck for the last 6 months, being unable to fly back home to Washington, D.C., staying at my mom's, you hardly ever see anyone wearing a mask unless you walk into an airport. And then all of a sudden, you're in an alternate universe where everyone is wearing a muzzle. And that's at the federal government's dictate. And it blows my mind that governors like DeSantis here in Florida are not challenging Biden on being able to come into Florida. and many other states that oppose mask mandates. In fact, there are many states that have laws and executive orders against any government agency requiring face coverings. And yet, it's left to individuals like myself and others in my group who are normal Americans with little money who are suing without lawyers, trying to represent ourselves and fight the Biden administration because no state and no prominent, wealthy libertarian or conservative organization has stepped up to sue the administration on this mask mandate. And it's just crazy. You see the flood of lawsuits on the vaccine mandates, and yet nobody's challenging the mask mandate. It's really hard to imagine what the explanation is for that.
Lucas, what kind of reception have you received? Have you reached out? You've got a lawsuit against 7 commercial airliners. How have they received your argument? Do you have any allies in this?
Not in the airline business, although strangely, the CEOs of some of the airlines that my group of 13 is suing over their illegal mask exemption procedures for the disabled, they spoke out many months ago during the summer saying they want the federal mask mandate to be ended, but yet they've not taken any steps to do that. The CEO of Southwest, Gary Kelly, the CEO of Frontier, are among the ones who have spoken out saying the mask mandate needs to end. And yet they have not sued the TSA to stop this. They have not even relaxed their own uh, just unbelievably ridiculously strict internal exemption guidelines, which they could easily do and still be in compliance with the CDC and TSA order. We still have surveys showing between 60 and 65% of travelers believe in mandatory muscling. Um, and so it's been very difficult to find allies, even though some of the top airlines they've said they oppose it, but they haven't put their money where their mouth is. They have not initiated any legal action to stop the Biden administration from continuing this nonsense.
Lucas, we've got Josh Yoder, president of the U.S. Freedom Flyers, standing by. We'll bring him in a few moments. But I would like you to talk about Dr. Fauci. Why is Fauci, in your opinion, is Fauci because he's flip flopped on this? Of course, is he threading that political line like Biden is, not wanting to come out and get the CDC on board with stopping this mask mandate? What's going with Dr. Fauci in your opinion, Lucas?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Dr. Fauci because I have a group of about 30 Americans who are going to be suing Dr. Fauci very soon, probably in the next month here in December. We're going to be going after him and every other individual federal government official who has signed on to the transportation mask mandate in a conspiracy to violate the civil rights of the disabled. Very much excited for that suit. The two that I have going on now are going after the government agencies themselves, but I have a coalition who will be going directly after Dr. Fauci and all of the TSA, CDC, et cetera, officials who have signed off on this mandate, knowing it's illegal. And it's very difficult to understand where someone like Dr. Fauci is coming from. He knew at the beginning of the pandemic, and he said publicly numerous times that the science has shown for decades that masks are not effective in reducing the transmission of a respiratory virus such as COVID 19. Then he magically had this flip flop. And I think also he too is in the same position as President Biden, where he simply doesn't want to admit that he's wrong, which oddly for him, he would be admitting that he was correct originally and then that his flip flop is wrong. But we all have this human nature of not wanting to admit when we're wrong, right? It's very difficult to do that, Ian. And I suspect that is the way that Fauci is feeling. He is not paying attention to study after study after study that has been coming out around the world in the last several months, showing that places with mask mandates have not had any fewer COVID infections than places that did not have mandatory muzzling, and ignoring all of the health side effects that we're seeing now. from people who at work who have been forced to wear a mask and block their breathing for a year and a half. They're coming down with dental problems. They're coming down with respiratory issues. They're coming down with bacterial infections and on and on and on and on. So when is someone going to step up and be able to eat crow and say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I looked at some data and at least, at first it looked like it was healthy. But clearly the picture now is the scientific consensus is that masks do not work. They are nothing but pandemic theater. And I would love to see Dr. Fauci or President Biden step up and admit that to the American public.
Lucas, you've thrown out a couple of things that have caught my attention here, and certainly this was published on the one article that I came across with Business Insider. You're openly stating that this is a conspiratory against civil rights. I want you to expand on that and define what you mean by that. And then you just said something that also caught my interest, and that this mask wearing is theater. You're using the word theater. First, explain the conspiracy against civil rights approach and why you find that an accurate assessment of what's happening here, and then thread in the theater angle that you just mentioned. What does that mean?
Sure. On the first part, Ian, there's a specific federal law that prohibits conspiring to interfere with the civil rights of a protected minority class, and I'm part of that class with the disabled. My medical condition, severe anxiety, is disabling. I cannot wear a mask because of it. One thing we do not ever hear about in the media about this transportation mask mandate is that there are tens of millions of Americans who are being prohibited from flying and using any form of public transportation across the entire nation because of this mask mandate. The list of disabilities where people cannot cover their face are numerous. There are sensory disorders, autism, anxiety, breathing disorders such as chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, asthma, post traumatic stress disorder. I've heard from a lot of military veterans who have served our country fighting for our freedoms, and they are suffer from PTSD and anxiety. Putting on a mask reminds them of being held captive or being in a bunker, having trouble breathing from their service. And yet, what are we doing to these military veterans who have served our nation and come home with a disability such as PSD? We throw them off an airplane, like one of the plaintiffs in my airlines case, Mr. Eads from Warsaw, Missouri. So we are going after the airlines on this conspiracy charge. They have all conspired to make it nearly impossible for any disabled American to get a mask exemption in violation of some 30 different laws, treaties, the Constitution, and federal transportation regulations. We also have all these federal officials, such as Dr. Fauci, Dr. Walensky, the head of the CDC, Mr. Pasolke, the head of the TSA. They have all signed off on this mask mandate, knowing that it contains all these illegal provisions targeting the disabled and prohibiting us from flying or using public transportation. And so that is where we're going after both the individual government actors and the airlines on the conspiracy. Every airline employee that denies one of us a mask exemption, we are going to be adding them to the lawsuit as a personal defendant for neglecting to prevent the conspiracy to interfere with civil rights. Then, on your second point about pandemic theater, the science is very clear that wearing masks does not reduce the spread of coronavirus. In fact, I looked at a study from a few months ago that compared, there were 40 states at some point that did a statewide mask mandate, 10 that did not, including here in Florida. The 10 states that did not have a mask mandate, they had a death rate per capita 6% lower than the 40 states that did have a mask mandate. And there was a study that came out looking at a mask mandate in Bexar County, Texas, where San Antonio is located, comparing it to the counties around it that did not have a county mask mandate. And the infection level, again, per capita was higher in the county with the mask mandate than in the counties that did not mandate muzzles. So we are seeing study after study come out. There was a famous one earlier this year in Denmark where they did a randomly controlled study They assigned half the people to wear masks, half the people not to wear masks, and there was no statistical significant difference in the number of the people in the study. And this was like 7 or 8 thousand people who were in the study across Denmark. No significant difference in the two groups on who got COVID. A study by the CDC found out last summer that 85% of those in an area they studied who got infected with COVID reported to the researchers that they always or frequently wore masks outside of the home. And I could spend hours going on these about all these different studies, Ian. But I realize our time is limited. But I hope that gives you some idea when I talk about pandemic theater. The masks are a psychological tool to try and make people feel better, to reduce their panic and anxiety that there's this new virus that we really can't control. But they really, in practice, do nothing. Just think about it. Let's say you and I are sitting on an airplane. I'm in the middle seat, and we have Josh, who's coming on soon, and in the right seat, you're on my left, and I have a mask on, just a cheap cloth or surgical mask, and I'm breathing heavily because I'm having an anxiety attack. What's happening if I'm infected? My respiratory droplets, instead of just shooting out the front of my mouth, settling into the seat back in front of me, they're going right out the sides of my mouth, right into you and Josh's faces. So the whole thing is just a joke. At first, maybe people thought, oh, maybe we need to do something. Let's try it out. But we've been trying it out for a year and a half now, and COVID is still here and is starting to rage again in Europe, where they have strict mask mandates and so forth. So it's just a time to end this show. We've tried this theater long enough. We know it doesn't work. Let's close the curtain, turn out the lights, and move on to some more effective strategies.
Vaccine mandates would be a different arena to discuss, and we can get into that. But I want you to clarify, Lucas, why would these airlines conspire against the American people? Why would they do that, Lucas?
That's a good point. I think they are trying to placate the 2/3 or so of Americans who favor masks. And it's a lot easier to discriminate against a minority, against the disabled like myself, than it is to try and make upset the majority of your customer base. The majority of their customers want everyone masked, and if they see disabled people on the flight who aren't masked, those people could cancel their tickets, or they could, get angry and cause incidents, as we've seen with thousands of incidents of flight attendants and passengers assaulting and harassing people who need to take off their masks during a flight to be able to breathe. Um, that's about the only reason I can see behind the conspiracy, is that they want to prevent anyone who can't wear a mask from using public transportation, so that the rest of their customers can feel safe, can feel this theater that they're going through. That, okay, well, I'm wearing my muzzle, everyone else is covering their nose and mouth, so hey, that's fine. I'm okay now. I'm safe. But it actually makes no sense, Ian, because airplanes are among the safest places you can be during a pandemic. They all have these very high efficiency particulate filters called HEPA, HEPA. When the planes are in the sky, they are recirculating that air with fresh air from the outside every 3 to 4 minutes. It's even better than in many hospital operating theaters. And so there really is no science at all behind having people on planes wear masks. It's also totally ridiculous when you consider that people take their masks off to eat and to drink for extended amounts of time. If it takes you half an hour to have your lunch on the plane, that's a half an hour you don't have your mask on, and that's going on throughout the whole aircraft. And so, even if masks were effective, the fact that there are different times during the flight you could remove them, it just shows that this whole notion of masking is, it's nothing but for the airlines, but trying to calm the fears of the panicked masses. It actually has no scientific basis whatsoever.
Lucas, there's a book. You're talking. You brought up the word conspiracy, and there's a book that a former Stanford fellow wrote. It's called the Federal Reserve Conspiracy, and I think more and more Americans are opening up to the to the concept that perhaps there is a conspiracy at play here on different levels, and you're identifying one that the airlines are executing that are hampering your civil rights. Have you always been objective to mask wearing, Lucas, or were you tolerant at first and then simply decided to speak out and do something about not wanting to wear them?
No, 100% opposed from the beginning. As soon as I started hearing about the flip flops when Fauci and the CDC and others started recommending masks, I was just very skeptical. I thought this just doesn't sound like this is a real mitigation technique. You put a piece of cloth on your face, unless you have some medical grade respirator that's truly fit and sealed and everything. Anybody knows you can. If you live in a cold climate, not we can't do this here in Florida, Ian, but hey, if you're up in Minnesota or North Dakota or somewhere, all you have to do is put on a surgical mask, one of those ubiquitous light blue color things we see everywhere. Just go walk outside when it's below freezing and start breathing, and have someone record you, and you'll see the plumes of your respiratory droplets going out the top, bottom, and sides of your mask. So all it does is redirect the directions of where your droplets are going instead of going straight forward. They're just spewing out top, bottom, side, side. So I started doing a lot of research and finding all these studies from before COVID where people had looked at, oh, should we actually have masks on in the operating room? Or there were studies in Ontario province, Canada, about should nurses wear masks during the flu season. And every single one of them I read said no scientific correlation between those who wore masks and any reduction and infection. And some of them actually found that the people who wore masks regularly had more health problems. And so I put on a mask a few times just to sort of test it out, but immediately started having these panic attacks and hyperventilation, and ripped it off. And pretty much throughout the whole pandemic, I've never worn a mask except for a couple times going shopping at Costco, where they were like the mask Nazis, even here in Florida at the Costco. It didn't matter if you had a medical condition or a doctor's note or whatever. If you wanted to come in, you had to wear a mask. And if you did not wear a mask, they threatened to call the police on you, and they would not check you out. So I would, reluctantly put it on, and then when I would get into an aisle where nobody was, I would take it off, and then when I turned the corner, I'd put it on again. Okay, no, so yeah, just extremely opposed from the very beginning. I haven't flown now since last June, which is, oh gosh, 17 months now, which is just crazy because I normally fly about 50 to 60 times a year all over the world. And when I flew in May and June of last year, that was when the masks were just starting to become a thing. But all you had to do was say you had a medical exemption and nobody harassed you and they didn't make you put it on. And then later in the summer, that started changing to where many of the airlines completely said, if you have a medical condition and you can't wear a mask, we're not going to allow you to fly, period. It doesn't matter how many doctor's notes you have or anything. You just won't be allowed to use our airline whatsoever. And that's part of what we're going after the airlines on, is that even before the federal mask mandate took effect February 1st this year, the airlines themselves, as of like last June, July, were starting to ban all disabled people who could not wear a mask from flying, which is completely in violation of federal law.
The psychological impact is a very real thing for people, for human beings, and I applaud you for using the word theater. Before we bring in Josh Yoder, I'd like you to talk a little bit about this case against the TSA, what that looks like. You're saying it's going to be given to the Supreme Court this week. Talk about that, if you would, Lucas.
Sure. We actually, my group has six lawsuits going against the TSA that were filed in different courts of appeals around the country. There's an interesting provision in the law, just like with the OSHA vaccine mandate, where you can skip going to the trial court, the U.S. District Court. You can go directly to the Court of Appeals and file a case. The same thing applies to any order issued by the TSA. So we have leaped over all the district courts, and filed cases in 6 different circuits of the U.S. Courts of Appeals around the country, myself and 12 other individuals. The case I'm involved in is with 2 other Floridians and the 4-year-old autistic son of a Florida man who has been having great difficulty flying out of state for his son's specialized medical care. So we filed these petitions October 19th. Some of them were transferred to the Federal Appeals Court in Washington, D.C., and several of us got rulings against our emergency motions to enjoin the order pending the appeal. Those came down about a week ago. So we are now working on several emergency applications to the Supreme Court saying that we were refused an injunction in the Court of Appeals. This mandate is clearly illegal on so many different grounds, in addition, and including discriminating against the disabled, but it also violates the 10th Amendment because it overrules state mask policies when the TSA and the CDC don't have any authority to do that. It violates our constitutional freedom to travel because we are being banned as disabled people from using any mode of transportation other than our own automobiles. And many disabled people like myself don't even own cars. So we will be bringing those forward this week to the Supreme Court, asking for an emergency injunction to stop enforcement of the mask mandate while our cases proceed. It's a long shot, but we have a good case law in the pandemic. The Supreme Court has struck down on an emergency basis numerous states' restrictions on religious worship, for instance, because that's a First Amendment violation. We also had the landmark eviction moratorium case in August, where Biden, despite knowing that it was unconstitutional, tried to have the CDC continue to ban evictions, which is a clear 10th Amendment violation because that is the domain of the states. The federal government does not get involved in landlord tenant law. And the Supreme Court struck that down 6-3 in very harsh language. And so we are hoping that based on that case law, the Supreme Court will take a look at this mask mandate and see that it is no different than the eviction ban, that the federal agencies have absolutely no authority to do this. And on the last point on this here, Ian, the most important thing to emphasize is that Congress has never passed a national mask mandate. This is all the doing of the Biden administration and the CDC, the TSA, the Health and Human Services Department. They simply do not have any authority from Congress to regulate what we have to put on our faces. That law just does not exist. Congress has had 20 months of the pandemic to pass a law requiring masks in the transportation sector if it wanted to do so. It has not done that. Congress does not want a mask mandate. And so it is not for the Biden administration to step in and play the role of Congress. That's why we have a constitution. That's why we have separation of powers. We're hoping the Supreme Court will recognize that and put a halt to this mask enforcement.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because my previous guest, Dean Reuter, attorney and author, also alluded to one of his concerns currently in the country, and that executive orders are far overreaching the American people's rights. Lucas, you're living in Florida with family right now, but what is it that you do in D.C. For listeners to understand? Why is it that you live there?
Oh, I've lived there for quite a long time. I grew up in Northern Virginia and worked in newspapers around the country as a reporter for many years. Worked most recently as an editor for a National Transportation Association newsletter. And then several years ago, put that behind to do my travel blogging. And now that's all pretty much been put on ice by the pandemic. So I'm suffering economically, suffering mentally, and suffering physically, and I'm not getting out and hiking and exploring and being active as I'm used to be. So the mask mandate has had an incredible number of negative effects on me, and I've devoted my time, since I can't travel now due to it, to trying to fight back in court and hoping that eventually we're going to get some victories here. It's been a very long 6 months. We're very far along in some of the cases, starting some of the other ones, facing a lot of legal obstacles, but very determined and are going to make sure that I and the people in my group who are involved that have come to me and want to participate, we are going to fight this with everything we have. Despite the fact we're not lawyers, we're learning the laws we go along, and we are going to keep pushing this until some judge somewhere puts the gavel down and says enough of this.
Lucas, with your approval, I'm going to thread in Josh Yoder into the conversation.
Of course, yeah, I've talked to Josh a couple times before, so I know who he is.
Please hold. Okay, we've got Lucas on hold. I'm bringing in Josh Yoder. Josh, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Josh, I'm threading you into the discussion currently right now with Lucas Wall. Uh, Gentlemen, thank you both for making your time available to join the program. Josh, we've just finished with Lucas, and as you may know, Josh, there are a number of lawsuits that Lucas has organized. He's got one right now heading to the Supreme Court against the TSA, and I understand the two of you know each other. Josh, tell listeners, and of course you joined the program a few days ago. Tell listeners what you know about the work that Lucas is doing.
Yeah, I've been following what Lucas has been doing now for a few months, and I really applaud it. I applaud him for taking a stand and actually making his voice heard. And he's helping not just himself, but millions of other Americans who are experiencing the same issues. What we see happening coming out of the Biden administration is completely unconstitutional. They don't have the authority to do what they're doing. Talking about the mask mandates on airplanes, they routinely reference the mask mandates as being federal law. It's not federal law. They're completely incorrect in saying that. Some things that I would possibly do differently, or I like what he's doing with the airlines, but I think we should also be focused on the CDC, the FDA, the executive branch, Department of Homeland Security, all these different people who are stepping well outside their realms of power and trying to exercise authority over free Americans over which they have no authority.
Lucas, bring us up to date there, because I know that you've brought in the CDC with that lawsuit against Biden. Some commentary there from your end, Lucas.
Yeah, we are going after the governmental agencies, Josh. The first lawsuit that I filed in early June targets the CDC, the Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees CDC, the TSA, the Department of Homeland Security, which is the parent agency over TSA, the Department of Transportation for failing to enforce the Air Carrier Access Act, which prohibits discrimination against the disabled by airlines, President Biden, the airport authority in Orlando, and the transit system in Orlando. And then, because of some of the quirks in the law, my group has also filed 6 lawsuits last month, specifically targeting the TSA and its enforcement of the mask mandate. The CDC put it out, but the CDC doesn't have any enforcement officers. So they're relying on TSA to enforce it. If we can get TSA prohibited from enforcing it, then the whole thing kind of falls apart, because there's nobody then at the airport who will be checking to make sure that anybody wears a mask. And obviously, we're going after the airlines as well, because even if all of the governmental mask mandates were struck down, the airlines prohibited disabled people from flying for much of the second half of last year. Anybody who couldn't tolerate wearing a mask, no matter what your disability, if you're a 4-year-old kid and you have autism and you can't wear a mask, sorry, you can't fly on any airline in the nation. So that's why we have to also go after the airlines, because we have to ensure that they can never again conspire to prohibit tens of millions of disabled Americans from using the public airspace, which is enshrined into law that disabled people have a right to use the nation's commercial aviation system.
Yeah, I think the both of you are doing incredible work, and Josh, as a pilot yourself, as a flyer, perhaps I can speak for Lucas as well. The work that you're doing, Josh, is so incredible and important for the American people. And as you allude to, Lucas, the balance and the freedom to travel using the airlines freely without any of these mandates. I want to get in a little bit into vaccine mandates, and Josh, you may not know, but Lucas has made the choice to receive a vaccination. I don't know which one you received, Lucas, but you did state clearly that you support people's rights to receive or not to receive the mandates. Josh, talk a little bit about what you and your group, again, for listeners understand, this is Josh Yoder, the president of U.S. Freedom Flyers. Josh, address a little bit about what you're doing right now to combat these vaccine mandates, and if you have any comments in regards to the continued mandates on these masks, and throwing into this a situation that I know you're well aware of, Josh, a flight out of San Antonio headed for Las Vegas that clearly pinpointed a private conversation, even though these people were masked, even though a conversation was taking place against masks. And Lucas, I don't know if you know about this, but a man and his family were deboarded, the entire plane taken off, the entire plane passengers deboarded, this man thrown into custody about having a conversation, a private conversation, no conflict, no confrontation at all, a private conversation with another passenger about not wanting to wear a mask, even though they were masked. So that aside,
I did read about that a few days ago, and that is just one of the numerous thousands of examples of how this mask policy has been taken to the extreme and is just absolutely insane.
yeah, thank you, Lucas. Josh, please address where U.S. Freedom Flyers is at right now in regards to this fight against the vaccine mandates.
Sure, USFreedomFlyers.org. We're an all-volunteer grassroots freedom movement that was started by airline professionals against forced vaccine mandates. It's quickly expanded far beyond aviation professionals. We have passengers, we have military groups, train operators, lots of different people that are joining us that are under the same boat, especially as federal contractors. So we're all fighting back, and we are actually in the process of suing the Biden administration on the basis of legality of the mandates. I can really sympathize with Lucas, and people are having issues with masks. I see it frequently. I've seen young children being thrown off of flights. It's really totalitarian the way the airlines are addressing this. But what I believe is that coercion starts at the top, and this is where we need to stop it. These companies are in bed with the federal government, and they often like to justify the actions that they take based on the mandates coming down from the federal government. They love to call law, which is not law. I think it's time that all citizens get involved. This isn't something that we can win just in the transportation sector. We need every single person to get involved and to push back. It's time that we take our rights back as free Americans.
Lucas, some comments on that.
Yeah, well, Josh makes a good point that drives my group absolutely insane is all these signs at airports and train stations and on buses and on any airline website you go to. If you go to book a ticket on American Airlines, for instance, as I was looking at the other day, because we're planning to add American to our lawsuit soon as the eighth airline, because several people have been denied mask exemptions. You go to book a ticket on American, and every single page you see for like the 8 pages you have to go through to book a ticket, in bold letters at the top of the page, it says, federal law requires you to wear a mask at all times while in the airport and on the airplane. And, I happen to have a college degree in political science, so I'm a lot more educated on the law than most non-attorneys are. But even any kid in middle school who's taken any kind of civics or government class would be able to tell you one of the most fundamental tenets is, how does a bill become a law? It gets introduced in a body of Congress. One of the bodies passes it. It goes to the other chamber. That chamber passes it. Then it goes to the president. The president signs it. Then it actually becomes a law. Have any of these vaccine or mask mandates gone through that process? Any eighth grader who has passed their civics class can tell you no, they have not. So for the airlines and the government itself to be, we call it, there's actually a legal term that we're charging the airlines with. I think it's called, it's fraudulent misrepresentation of the law. That's it's a civil violation you can sue someone for. If somebody tells you the law is X and they know it is not, that is illegal and you can sue them for that. So we are going after the airlines for exactly what Josh noted. None of this is a law. These are executive orders and mandates promulgated without any public or notice of comment by these executive agencies. None of them have the standing of law. If anyone in the airline business tells you that it's a federal law to wear a mask, ask them what is the number in the United States Code of Laws that you could look up that law, and they will have no response to you.
Josh, Lucas has used a pretty strong term that a lot of people, frankly, stray away from using. It was coined in the 60s, I believe, maybe in the 50s by the CIA. It's the term is conspiracy. And yet Lucas is clearly stating that these airlines, I want to get your thought on this and your view on this, Josh. Lucas is clearly stating that the airlines have conspired to violate civil rights. So you have comments on that, Josh? Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, I do actually. The term that was actually coined by the CIA was conspiracy theory, to discredit people. What you see happening today is no longer a theory; it is an actual conspiracy. And Lucas is correct. You can sue the airlines for that reason, or anyone else who chooses to use that. What they're doing is completely illegal. I would assume that they're aware of it. I would hope so, because it's very evident to anyone who's paying attention that what's going on is not law, and it's completely unenforceable. The only reason they're getting away with it is because passengers aren't standing up. We need people to stand up and say no. That's the most powerful thing that you can do. And once we bring mass non-compliance to all these illegal mandates, we can make them go away.
Lucas, are you finding that your movement is growing? Are people appreciating what you're doing? Are your numbers growing, Lucas? Are people saying no?
I hear from dozens of people a week about what's going on. I started this effort by myself, and some media outlets started covering the cases. And I started initially in the first month, I was probably hearing from hundreds of people a week, many of them wanting to give donations to help with my legal costs. I've got an account on GoFundMe for that, being that I'm representing myself. And then a whole bunch of others said, I want to join this case, and they told me about their stories. And so I chose a representative group of 12 to join into the airlines case. We have another 12. Some are the same as the airlines, some are new people who are in the TSA cases. I've got a group of about 30 for the case against Dr. Fauci, Dr. Walensky, and all the others that we hope to file next month. Um, the problem is that the needle is not really moving very much in public opinion, Ian. And I think that alludes to what Josh was talking about. If we had massive civil disobedience, if we had a plane where a quarter to a half of people took their masks off, and that happened on every other flight going across the country, then the airline system would ground to a halt. If they tried to divert every flight where 10 or more people protested and took their masks off, um, it would basically bring the system to a stop. But unfortunately, we don't have people with that sort of gumption, because until we get a massive number, if you're the one person who takes your mask off and refuses to put it back on, those flight attendants are going to possibly have the plane diverted, talk to the captain, possibly have the plane diverted. You're going to be thrown out of the plane in a city halfway between where you were and where you're trying to go. You're then going to be banned from that airline from ever flying with them again, at least until the mask mandate is over. So we have these harsh consequences that are being put into effect to deter any civil disobedience. And we still have this public opinion polling that shows between 3/5 and 2/3 of Americans still believe to this day that not only that they believe that masks are effective, but they actually believe that they should be able to violate everyone else's individual rights by saying that I don't care what medical condition you have, you're going to have to wear a mask so it can make me feel safer. Even though I've gotten 3 vaccines, I'm still paranoid of the virus, and therefore you have to do something to prevent my anxiety and fear. And that's just not the way we operate in America. If you're that afraid of getting a virus after you've been vaccinated 3 times, and I speak as someone who's been vaccinated twice now, don't get on a plane. That, you can't force everyone else to do something to obstruct their breathing, a most essential function of life, so that you can feel a little bit better in this whole world of pandemic theater. So There is a strong vocal minority, Ian. Unfortunately, I wish I could say it. We're growing, but I don't see the evidence for that. You would think after 20 months of this that people would see that the masks are not making a difference, that they have not driven down cases. You would hope that those numbers of people favoring mandatory muzzling would go down. But we're just not seeing that, and I just cannot explain that.
Josh, you just heard Lucas use a term, pandemic theater. I want to get your thoughts on that, and I want you to answer this question, Josh, because Lucas has given his answer to it. Why is it that the Biden administration continues to be adamant about people wearing masks? What are your thoughts on that, Josh?
Well, Ian, I think it's like we discussed. Was it last week in San Antonio? This has nothing to do with our health. It has everything to do about control. And we really got into the weeds last time about Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum and the Fourth Industrial Revolution, lots of different things. What I would like to say is this: in 2020, the airlines paid for a peer-reviewed Harvard study that came to the conclusion that your chance of contracting COVID on an aircraft is 0.003%. And they were touting what a safe experience it is to fly on these various airlines because of the HEPA filtration systems. They said, listen, come fly with us. This was at a time when they had no passengers. They were all going broke. And, they can prove to you through a peer-reviewed study that you have almost zero chance of contracting COVID on an aircraft. So obviously these masks and even vaccines are not for your health. So what you're seeing is a form of coercion. It's about control. And it's once again, it's just the companies falling in lockstep with the federal government. They've all been paid off. They've all received COVID funds, and now in the contracts that they're getting from the federal government, especially the federal contractors, there are vaccine mandates. We believe in those contracts. We filed FOIA requests to actually get to the bottom of this, but that's what appears to be happening.
Lucas, are you seeing? Josh has just mentioned a discussion, a conversation that he and I had last week in San Antonio about the Great Reset, this digital reset. Are you seeing any threads into a larger, broader, global economic system at play here, Lucas?
I try to stay away from those bigger issues, Ian. There's so much going on in the world, and I am strictly focused on trying to get rid of the transportation mask mandates. Um, I can't really go into a lot of other things that Josh briefly mentioned. But one thing that is interesting is that the airlines all took lots of money, billions and billions of dollars, both in cash bailouts to keep their employees on board last year when very few people were flying. And then also in low interest loans from the government to keep operating. And one thing that we've discovered in suing the airlines is that when you accept federal financing, federal contracts, that exposes you to a 1973 law called the Rehabilitation Act, which was sort of the predecessor before the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that says that if you accept federal financial assistance, you, as a part of receiving that money, you may not discriminate against the disabled, and there are very strict provisions about that. So it's really outrageous, and what we're going after the airlines for, in addition to the conspiracy to violate civil rights, is that they took our taxpayer money to keep them afloat. And a requirement of that is that you cannot discriminate against the disabled. And what did they do? They immediately turned around and started banning every disabled person with any condition that precludes them from wearing a mask from flying on their airline that our tax dollars are subsidizing. And so, as a taxpayer, I find that completely outrageous. And we are going to try and make sure these airlines are held accountable in a court of law for that behavior. So it's interesting because now a lot of the contracts are including these vaccine mandates, which, as you noted, is kind of a whole other subject that I don't work on. But the way before any of these vaccine mandates became part of federal contracts, the rehabilitation law has been in existence since 1973, and the airlines have to obey that. They cannot prohibit people with disabilities who cannot breathe with a mask on from using their airline.
I applaud you both for your efforts to retain these civil rights that we have, and And Josh is well aware that one of my main concerns here, as we open up a broader picture of global economics, one of my main concerns for the federal government anyway, is that it's in vastly approaching $30 trillion in national debt, and that's what screams attention to me, and my listeners are well aware of that. Josh, some final words for listeners to walk away with, and perhaps some words for Lucas as he marches into this week with that TSA lawsuit that's heading into the Supreme Court.
Sure. Specifically for Lucas, yeah, I would tell him to keep his head up. We certainly support him, and there are millions of passengers. I think he alluded to the fact that the polling is showing that the majority of passengers are against unmasking. I would personally disagree with that. Polling is highly skewed. What I hear on a daily basis in the airports and on the airplanes is that people are sick and tired of the mask mandates. Something that I've just noticed as an individual when I walk through an airport, when I'm on the airplane, there are like more and more people. They have their masks down around their chins. They have them off completely. Just pay attention next time you fly. Maybe you can be one of those people and helping push back. And also something else that isn't being addressed, and that's maybe it's slightly off topic here, but that's vaccine injuries that are happening to aircrew and how the companies are covering these up, the companies and the unions. I just received multiple calls today. I actually got five reports today of pilots who have been vaccine injured, and the companies are not telling these stories. They've lost their medicals, right? They're having cases of myocarditis. They're having blood clots. Their D-dimer tests are high, and they're being taken out. And this is just, that was just today. I get these reports daily, and we're actually holding a database at U.S. Freedom Flyers. And this is something that the flying public needs to be aware of. As the FAA, the CDC, and all these different organizations are pushing this mandated vaccines on these air crews, not everyone should be getting these vaccines, which is really becoming apparent. Something that we've noticed that we've also been keeping data on is the number of increased in-flight emergencies. I can't say that for sure it's from the vaccine, but it seems highly suspicious as we move into an era where all these mandates are in place.
And Josh, I think some of the information I've sent to you recently, you're aware of my use of the term inoculation as an alternative to injections, and of course vaccines. These seem to be appropriately termed inoculations. Lucas, for listeners, please some final words and what you would like. Perhaps you have some comments for Josh and the work that he's doing. Some final words for listeners to walk away with.
Yeah, well, I appreciate all the work Josh is doing. I think we have a little bit different focus in terms of the types of mandates that we're fighting. But, as someone who's a libertarian in general, anybody who's fighting mandates and fighting for personal freedom is on my side. And I appreciate the work that he's doing. We have a commercial airline pilot who is part of our group who's going to be suing Dr. Fauci, Dr. Walensky, and others because she is highly objected to having to not only wear a mask herself, but to have to be put in the position of becoming the federal mask police. That takes away from a pilot and a flight attendant's safety duties. If they are spending 3/4 of their time patrolling the cabin looking for people not putting their masks on between bites and sips during a meal, they are not paying attention to the safety measures that they are supposed to be paying attention to. There was an incident where a pilot descended to the wrong altitude recently because there was flight attendants whining that someone in row 12 wasn't wearing a mask, and the pilot was told to descend to 10,000 feet, and he descended to 12,000 feet because of all this discussion about someone in row 12 not wearing a mask. Thank goodness that didn't result in a catastrophe. But it's just an example of how terrible these mandates can be. And we see all these fights and altercations going on board. So we need to put a stop to it. For your listeners, so first of all, Ian, thank you for having me. And for your listeners who want to learn more about me and about my cases, you can go to my travel blog. The address is very simple. It's lucas.travel, lucas.travel. You won't see much in the last several months about actual travel on there, but you'll read a lot about the lawsuits and what we're trying to accomplish in court with fighting back against the government and against the airlines.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time on Sunday evening and joining Discussions of Truth. Josh, that's usfreedomflyers.org.
That's correct. usfreedomflyers.org. Please click on join us, sign up for emails so that you can stay up to date as to what we're doing. And if you can donate to our legal cause, we would really appreciate that as well.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Ian. See you.
Look, I can't stress it enough. I've been doing this work now for 5 years because I know the importance of sounding the alarm. Let me just lay it out here for you, folks. And I'm simply going to echo the words of U.S. Air Force retired Brigadier General Robert Spalding III. Look, the United States has been invaded. It's easy to be complacent, folks. It's easy to be comfortable. I just wrote an article outlining the history of the economic attack on the United States, and in that article, and you can find it on my website, iantrottier.com. America Remember the Alamo. In that article, I clearly state my opinion, and I can support it, well documented, that the United States has simply never gained its financial and economic independence. Whereas it has always, since Washington's army, it has always been financially dependent on an outside bank. And that outside bank is based in Europe. And if the notion is conceived as being wild or extravagant, I even mentioned it right there in that discussion with Lucas and Josh. There's now a fastly approaching $30 trillion national debt. So this concept that the United States is not financially independent is very well sourced and very legitimate. And I'll state it as being fact. Prove me wrong. In order to prove me wrong, you will first have to do, as Anthony Sabatini, Florida representative, said on this show 3 weeks ago, you will have to repeal the Federal Reserve Act. Period. Simple. There's no other way to prove that right, because you will, as an American, you will need to demand transparency in that system. And right now, you do not have that. You have not had that in decades. And you're seeing the repercussions of that invasion, that stealth economic invasion. By now not being willing to have not being able to have a private conversation about your disapproval of having to wear masks, as we saw with this fellow Nick aboard flight 2075, headed for Las Vegas out of San Antonio on board the Frontier Airlines craft. He was removed. The entire plane deboarded because of a private conversation about not wanting to wear the masks, even though everyone on that airplane that I know of, that's certainly the subjects of the matter, this fellow named Nick, was masked. So here is wearing a mask and having a private conversation, non-confrontational, not disturbing anyone around him, but caught the attention of one of the attendants, who it seems was, quite frankly, offended because of this person's eavesdropping. They were eavesdropping on the private conversation. And the next thing these people know, he and his family, 2 young kids, totally taken off the plane. The plane deboarded and put into police custody. So now, because America is not awake and not alert, and because America is simply compliant and comfortable not speaking out against the loss of your civil rights, this machine, which I state is based in Europe, and I give examples and sources as to why I understand and know it to be based in Europe. This machine is now encroaching on your constitutional rights and taking them away, flat out taking them away, right underneath your nose. It's time to wake up. And only you can make a difference. Only you can wake up to this. And you do that by speaking out. You do that by making your voice heard. And your voice will be heard, but you must raise it. And you must speak your voice for it to be heard. But you can make that difference. So I thank Lucas Wall for joining the program. Lucas Hall. Pardon me. Anyway, I thank Lucas Hall for joining the program, and I thank Josh Yoder for joining the program. And folks, what you're seeing right now is people are getting past any type of political divide. Okay, and I said this on my show earlier today with Dean Reeder. People are getting past their political divides because people are now realizing, regardless of Democrat, regardless of Republican, their constitutional rights, the freedoms that make this country a beautiful place, a wonderful place to live, their constitutional rights are being destroyed. They're being infringed on. And that's what's happening. You can see it with Bill Maher. You can see it with professional athletes. You can see it right now across the board. It seems that this movement now of defending basic constitutional rights is growing. That's my view because having started this program in 2016 because of the Zika virus in Miami Beach and the pesticide being used, because of that debacle, I have now seen this global agenda, which I call a global agenda. You can argue with that, or you can not agree with that. That's up to you. Go to my research tab on my website, and I have well documented, long list of research that shows that what I speak about is factual. It's happening. It's happening. And I break it down, and it should be well stated. This is very much when all the water trickles down into the vase. What you're looking at on a very basic level, you follow the money. What you're looking at is an invasion of your religious rights. And I'm not a religious person, but I do know that the country which I live in is founded on religious freedom. The Mayflower, 1620. That is why they left England. That is why that early New England colony was developed, to practice religion freely. Follow the trail. I urge you to read America Remember the Alamo and contribute. Get involved. And if you do nothing less, send this episode to a friend or a family member. Send it on to somebody. Send it along. Pass it forward. If you do nothing else. Get involved financially if you have the means. U.S. Freedom Flyers, Lucas.travel, and iantrottier.com. We appreciate your support. Again, I thank Josh and Lucas for joining the program. And folks, until Wednesday, the regular scheduled time. Oh, and by the way, last night I joined Earth Radio Network. I joined those gentlemen there for a 2-hour interview and discussion regarding the article, regarding the article that I just published on my site last night. So that's a great interview. You can find that. Where can you find that? You can find that at Earth Radio Network, and I will also tweet that real Ian Trottier. And I'm going to post it. I'm going to post it to my website, so you can find it. I'll be putting it under the articles tab. Again, it's a 2-hour interview, so it is in length, but you should find it quite interesting. So, folks, until next Wednesday, until this coming Wednesday, until next episode, this Wednesday, that is the 24th, and I got a great show. I simply have another phenomenal show. This is how it's been since I started the program, because I was by invitation I was asked to start this program. because of the research that I've done. So, rehosting Mark Shaw at the 6 o'clock hour and bringing on for the first time Dr. Peter McCullough. He'll be joining Discussions of Truth at the 5 o'clock hour. I'll bring him on at the quarter mark after the hour, and some other great guests coming your way. So enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening. If you're listening to this live, if you're catching this via iTunes or Spotify, please, folks, please get involved now and pass the message forward. And until Wednesday, this is Ian Trottier signing out for Discussion of Truth. Folks, be awesome.